Welcome to Becoming Human, where your life doesn't define you. No. You define your life. So, good morning, everybody. Today, what we're going to be looking to do is talk about one of the topics. It's going to be a chapter in one of the books. These new episodes are going to be entirely focused on the Becoming Human book that I should have available within 8 to 12 months. And what we'll be doing is discussing some of the chapters that I have in the works, and I imagine working on new chapters that will arise. One of the great things about creative expression is you can plot and plan all you want with what you want to have out there, which is great. It's a great aspect and a great part of the creation apparatus. But there's another medium, and that's just allowing the flow state to happen and express yourself. And as we'll go on in some of the other chapters, there's a great tool and resource that we have within us all to draw from what I call universal or infinite intelligence and potential. And we can access that often when we are in a state of giving. You know, for example, if you give someone advice, you ever wonder why you may have difficulty with, quote unquote, following your own advice, or someone else will be having a problem or challenge or difficulty, and you sit down with them and you listen to them, hear what they're going through, and all of a sudden it's like miraculously this super genius activates in your brain, and you provide this well thought out, rational answer for the other person that you may wonder afterwards, why didn't I think about that for myself? And as is covered in my book, which we'll go into detail, what ye give ye shall receive. Use it or lose it. And when you go to give advice to somebody else, you're seeking to give to them. Then the degree that you're seeking to give to them and the degree that you have faith that the answer will come is directly proportional to the access that you have to that infinite intelligence. And you can draw from that, and you can give that advice to your friends. Well, you might say, well, why can I do that for my friend? Why can't I do that for myself? You know, if I'm seeking to give to my situation. And the reality is that a lot of times when you're afraid of something and you're fearful, and this is another aspect of ourselves that will be covered in the book, you access the smaller part of you. Some people call it the ego. It's the fear-based response mechanism. And its job is not to create. It's not to draw from infinite intelligence. It's to protect you so that you survive. And it only has two tools available to it: fight or flight. And you might say, well, I mean, I've heard that before, but how does that pertain to some of the circumstances in my life that I may be having difficulty with, that I'm not finding a solution? I don't remember, you know, if I have difficulty at work, I don't remember punching my boss in the face or fleeing from him or her in terror. So what is that? What would it mean? What would that look like if I was having an egoic fight or flight response? Well, first off, you can identify whether or not you are having a fight or flight response by looking at how you feel about the situation. And, you know, do you feel uncomfortable? Do you feel tired? So let's take some examples, right? Let's say you have a really hectic and fast-paced job, and it's really busy, and you know, things are just getting overwhelming. You have some kids at home, difficulties with the spouse, whatever it is, you just get all of these things piling up. And you're supposed to do a report after school, or after work. And you get home and it just feels like everything's chaos. In fact, it's weird because you're supposed to do your paperwork tonight, and it actually seems like the kids are louder and more obnoxious than usual. It feels like your environment is even more hectic. It's like, why is this happening to me when I have to do it? And you just say, you know what? I don't have time. I don't have time to do this. And I wouldn't be in a good state of mind to do it anyways. I'm just going to have to procrastinate, put it off, deal with this situation. It's happening in my home right now. Well, friends, no, that sounded derogatory the way I just said friends, didn't it? Let me try that over. Well, friends. That just sounds creepy. No, but seriously, you guys are my friends. See, now that doesn't even sound genuine. It's hard to call someone your friend when you're not actually directly talking to them, so I guess it could be considered disingenuous. Anyways, I digress. Let's get on to the point. So in the scenario, you get home and you had a bunch of paperwork to do or whatever, and it just seems like everything's super hectic. Right? And you just decide not to do it. Well, that was actually the egoic mind, the surviving mind, utilizing your creative mind in an interesting way to still enact its fight or flight response. See, when you look at any of the sins, the 7 deadly sins, they're actually, I don't want to get too much into that, but they are fight or flight responses to the environment, because the ego activates when you have a situation. So the ego is your self-identity, and it sits inside of your subconscious. And subconscious, at least in my humble opinion, refers to a subjective consciousness, meaning as quote-unquote intelligent as it may be, and it actually is a supercomputer at your disposal. It's your faithful servant, as Einstein once alluded to, but it is limited to and beholden to what you believe it's capable of. And that's what the ego is. So imagine I have a piece of paper. That's the computation power. The entire paper represents the amount of power that your subconscious has. The ego would be a square on that piece of paper that you've outlined over the years with all the things that you think it can't do and it isn't. And so now you have this supercomputer that's confined to this little tiny box. And what happens is it's subjective, so it can only operate on what it's been fed in the past. And the more emotion, which is power, you have thoughts and emotions that drive you. That's the key. That's the key to everything. Your thoughts and your emotions. They are the driving force of all of your creations, all of your actions. And over time, the more feelings and the more you think about something, you turn those thoughts and feelings into values and beliefs. And they become hardwired in your subconscious and can't even see them anymore. And they become so real that you feel like they are reality. It all happens so quickly. And for many of us, we're not even aware. So when that person comes home and they have this paperwork and they, for one, in order for the egoic, fearful mind to be activated, you have to find yourself in a circumstance that you are afraid of. And what that means is if the ego is activating, which in this case it surely was, as a result or reaction to your paperwork, it means you were afraid of it. And for good reason. Because every time you've had experiences like this in the past with this paperwork, you have fed the beliefs and the values behind the paperwork. telling it that it's an enemy and it's something that you should rightfully be afraid of. And so the poor subjective consciousness, subjective mind, faithful servant, some people call it the devil, right? On your shoulder. No, it's your creation, it's your child. You made it, and it's doing the best it can. And one of the other things that we programmed into it is that we don't like to feel ashamed. We don't like to feel like we're doing anything wrong. We want to feel proud of ourselves. So when you come home, now your super subconscious, limited, and so albeit limited, subconscious mind, limited due to the fact that there's an egoic box inhibiting its abilities, is faced with two circumstances. It has this really scary thing of having to do the paperwork in front of it that we fed to it and told it a bunch of times how much we hate it. That day, just that day, if we were to rewind and hear what we said that day, probably dozens of times, at least in our minds, but probably out loud, out of an abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. And probably said, "Oh, I gotta go home and do my paperwork today. Oh my God." Dozens of times at least thought it. Said it to whomever would listen. And so now your ego has that, right? Your subconscious, limited by the ego, has that situation. And it's got another situation. All of the times in your life when you didn't do what you were supposed, quote unquote, supposed to do, and that shame associated with it, and how much that scares you because you identified to some degree your success with how often or not often you did something like that. And so you put your subconscious into a rock and a hard place, catch-22. And then it comes out, and then it uses another part of your brain, your creative brain, but it uses it for the wrong reason. In the wrong way. So it does what's called creative procrastination. Because it is in fight or flight mode. It is afraid. So what it wants to do is it wants to run from the paperwork, flee from the paperwork, but also simultaneously flee from the shame of not doing it. So guess what it does? It exacerbates the situations in your home life to make them seem more dramatic, more out of control, and more crazy than they really were, so that it could justify why it had to run away from the paperwork. And thereby, it exhibits fight or flight, in this case flight, by running away from the paperwork and the shame of doing the paperwork. I encourage you to spend some time and think about what we've talked about here, just in this. I'm going to keep my episodes to 15 minutes. My podcasts in the past used to be very long. But I want you to think about this. And think about, where else is this happening in your life? Where else in your life do you have a juxtaposition of two belief patterns designed to protect you in some way that are clashing together and doing the worst thing possible for you, your enjoyment of your life, and your successful completion of the things that you'd like to accomplish? And then simply seek to replace them. Use that same creative mind to make what you really want to happen. And we'll discuss lots of ways to do this, but I think the first step here is to become aware that this is happening. In fact, for any of you that are just first time listening to any of my stuff, it's not like I have a lot of followers yet, but the beginning begins with just listening to yourself. You don't even necessarily have to try to change anything yet. That will kind of come on its own, but you do want to become aware. Okay? So start listening to those and start seeing, where am I allowing the thoughts in my head from previously held beliefs and values to hold me back in some way. And then I'm actually going to make another episode right after this, but I wanted to break these into 2 smaller chunks. And I'm going to make one on taking responsibility for our actions. And it's actually going to probably mean something different than what you think it does. Until then, God loves you.